Good evening, everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. And I have the honor to introduce you the Ambassador of United Kingdom. In fact, Her Majesty's Ambassador, Энn Файф Прингл, and the lecture is about political system and political culture of the United Kingdom.
Good. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. And firstly, let me apologize for being late. We ran into one of Moscow's famous traffic jams trying to get here. I was asked to speak about political life and political traditions in the UK a few months ago, in fact in March, and little did I think that following an extraordinarily gripping election campaign in the UK, so many of our traditional political customs and practices would be turned on their head. So what I wanted to do tonight was say a little bit about what normally happens in elections and in our parliamentary tradition in the UK, and a little bit about what's actually happening now. Many of you will know that we have a very old Parliament in the UK. In fact, it was first set up in 1265, functioning as a Parliament under King John. So it's a very ancient Parliament, though in its current form it has existed since about the 18th century. Women gained the right to vote only in 1918, so they had to wait about 700, no, my maths is wrong. No, it's not. About 650 years they had to wait. A long time coming. Our Parliament is composed of what we call single-member constituency MPs. There are 650 MPs in the House of Commons, representing on average about 74,000 voters each, and they represent their interests in Parliament. The House of Lords is organised on a party basis, in much the same way as the House of Commons, but in the House of Lords, the Lords are less partisan on the whole, and there are many independent Lords who are called crossbenchers. You have to be 18 to vote in the UK, and 18 to be eligible to stand as a member of Parliament. Voting's not obligatory. You could nominate someone to vote on your behalf, called proxy voting. You can vote by postal ballot, and a political party is allowed to spend £30,000 for each seat it contests during an election. In other words, funding is controlled. Now, most of you will have seen on the television that when a clear winner emerges in our elections, that winner, who heads a political party, goes to see Her Majesty the Queen, and it is the Queen who asks that person to form a government, and the Prime Minister then goes to Downing Street and starts nominating ministers to his cabinet and junior ministers to government departments. By law, elections in the UK take place at least every 5 years. But if a party no longer commands the confidence of the House of Commons, a vote of confidence can be taken to get that government out of office in shorter time, or the Prime Minister can seek to dissolve Parliament too in exceptional circumstances. Civil servants like me are politically neutral and serve each government of the day regardless of which political party is in power. And my job is to advise ministers of the day and to implement whatever decisions they make. In the weeks before an election, civil servants get together, look at the political manifestos that are published by each political party and prepare briefing for those parties. So before the current election, we were preparing foreign policy briefing documents for a Conservative government getting into power, for a Labour government getting back into power, or less likely, but we did it, for a Liberal Democratic government getting into power. So we had to prepare mountains of paper and briefing according to what was set out in the party political manifestos for each party. The new government, when it gets into power, has no access to papers and advice that were given by civil servants to the previous government. The only way they get to see those papers are when they are eventually released either through freedom of information requests or released as part of the release of national archives, so quite a long time later. There's no wholesale cull of civil servants after an election in the UK, unlike in some other countries. As I say, civil servants are politically neutral, and that means that our ambassadors overseas also do not change when a government changes. As a civil servant, I cannot stand for Parliament. I would have to resign first. I can't be a civil servant and be a member of Parliament. Police officers can't be members of Parliament. Neither can members of the armed forces, judges, members of the House of Lords, or bankrupts. If you're bankrupt, you can't be a member of Parliament. Now, I wanted to give you, that's the theory of how Parliament and parliamentary life runs. And let me tell you what actually happened after our election on 6th of May. There were a huge number of firsts. For me, this is one of the most exciting elections I have lived through as a civil servant. There were a lot of firsts for anyone watching the process. First of all, we had live TV debates between the three leaders of the main parties. So David Cameron for the Conservatives, Nick Clegg for the Liberal Democrats, and Gordon Brown for Labour. Now, this was the first time ever we have had that. Politicians obviously were quite nervous about it because TV really can sell a personality to you, and it really had an impact in the UK on the voting population's understanding of the policies of the various parties and of the personalities, because it's very hard to pretend on TV. You're really up there in front of your audience. And according to the opinion polls, the people who came out best from those live debates were David Cameron and Nick Clegg. So it really had quite an impact. And now that we've had these live debates, they will probably continue for each electoral campaign. I'm going to bamboozle you with a few statistics now, because I need to tell you what the results were. This too was really significant for UK politics generally, a big shift. No one, first of all, won an overall majority of seats. You'd need to win 325 seats in the House of Commons, 326 actually, to win an overall majority. The Conservatives won 305 seats, so just short of a majority. Labour won 258 seats, 90 seats down on the last election in 2005. The Lib Dems, who had done so well in the debates on TV, nevertheless won 57 seats, 5 less than last election. But between them, the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives had 59% share of the vote. That's the largest share of a vote for a government, as they then became, since World War II, so that's quite significant. Labour won just 29% of the vote overall, which was their lowest showing since 1983. But the key telling statistic is 35% of voters voted for parties other than Labour or Conservative, who are our two biggest parties traditionally in the UK. And that was the highest showing since 1918. So almost 100 years since there has been a shift in voting patterns like that in the UK. So for people who follow this quite carefully, that's a real major change. The message to politicians was the two-party political system that we've had for a long, long time in the UK was no longer completely convincing for voters, and a number of them were looking for alternatives. We also elected our first Green Party MP ever, so another first there. The big question that politicians then faced was what to do with these results. When no party gains a majority in Parliament, we have an unwritten constitution that allows for negotiations to find out who is going to form a government. The incumbent Prime Minister has first call on forming a government. So that meant that Gordon Brown was still in number 10 on May the 7th, acting as a caretaker Prime Minister. That's also very unusual. And you'll have seen that negotiations took place between the parties, first of all between Conservatives and Lib Dems. Then the Lib Dems talked to Labour, and then they came back to the Conservatives, and finally the Conservatives and Lib Dems agreed to form a coalition. No civil servants were present in these talks. This was all done on a political basis between the parties, but against the backdrop of rolling press coverage, because everybody was fascinated by this, and some anxiety given our financial markets wanted a decision soon on who was going to run the country, because we never normally have a process that goes on for days on end. We normally have a very fast transition of power within a day in the UK. So ultimately, Gordon Brown went to the palace to tender his resignation. David Cameron then went to Her Majesty to offer to form the next government. And within 90 minutes of Gordon Brown leaving number 10 Downing Street, David Cameron was in number 10 Downing Street as the Prime Minister. That is how fast it works in UK politics. So if you're ever the poor Prime Minister leaving, think about that. You have very little time to pack your bags and your history very quickly. Other first, David Cameron in Downing Street is the youngest Prime Minister for almost 200 years. He's 43 years old, so is Nick Clegg. They have very similar backgrounds, which means they connect with each other and understand each other. This is the first coalition government in the UK in 65 years, the first ever Conservative Lib Dem coalition government, and the Lib Dems have 5 people sitting in cabinet and a junior minister in every major government department. So it's a real coalition government, and both sides got together and looked at each other's manifestos, which of course didn't agree on every point, and they formed a coalition government document that is now the Bible by which we as civil servants are working. And the key headlines for them were the principles of freedom, fairness and responsibility, the big headlines, and under that their key priorities were to reduce the UK's deficit, which is now at $150-odd billion, and to restore economic growth, to build a strong, fair society by reforming public services and encouraging individual responsibility. So, for instance, now, if you want to set up a school in an area for your children because you think you can do better than schools that are already there, you have the power to do that now in the UK, just to give you an idea. Reforming Parliament and politics to restore trust in democratic institutions. They are proposing fixed term parliaments now of 5 years. Traditionally under our system, the Prime Minister chooses when to hold an election, but must have held one within 5 years. But what Prime Ministers have done in the past is, obviously, they've chosen to go to the electorate when maybe the economy is doing really well and everything is going smoothly, when they have a better chance of getting a good response. So Conservatives and Lib Dems are now saying there should be a fixed term parliament, and they've set the date for the next election 5 years hence and already announced that. There'll be a referendum on changes to the voting system in Parliament, where, as I said at the beginning, single constituency MPs representing voters on a first past the post system. So if you basically win the seat if you get more than 50% of the vote. But that means that the smaller parties might gain quite a high percentage overall of the vote in the UK, but they might have very few seats because they never get to top dog in each constituency. So they're going to be looking at that and considering whether to bring in an alternative voting arrangement for future elections. They're also doing very popular things in terms of restoring freedoms to people, abolishing identity cards, which was a proposal, and going through all our laws to see if any of them are really out of date and really unnecessary and bureaucratic. I said at the beginning that the agreement permits disagreements between the Lib Dems and Conservatives. I mean, there are two different parties with two different manifestos, bringing them together in a coalition. So some of the headline areas were Britain's nuclear deterrent, Trident, where it will be retained but will be scrutinised to ensure value for money, and the Liberal Democrats will be able to make the case for alternatives. Nuclear energy, tax system, and also migration were other areas where the parties had differing views, and they will be hammering out compromises on these areas as we go along. As far as funding goes, there's going to be an emergency budget on 22 June, and then government departments will know how much money they have to do their business in the autumn when the Treasury tell us. Much of the detail on all these proposals has to be worked out. This is only the start of coalition government in the UK. So they've proposed things like if your MP is corrupt, your constituency can, with the support of people in the constituency, sack that MP. These are major proposals that will take a lot of detail to work out. My final point was, given I'm an ambassador, I wanted to say a little bit about William Hague as Foreign Secretary and the machinery of government that is being brought in that is also very new in the UK. William Hague was in Russia in January when he was head of the when he was the opposition foreign policy man in Parliament. He's got a keen interest in Russia, and I think he has set out clearly in terms that permanent confrontation is not a good basis on which to develop relationships, and he hopes for a better relationship with Russia. He has very ambitious views of the UK's role in the world, and he wants the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to be at the heart of government in developing the UK's role in the world. So they've set up a National Security Council to integrate properly at the highest levels of government the work of the Foreign Ministry, Defence Ministry, Energy, Home Office, and International Development Departments, to name a few. And the four key principles on which that effort will be based are, as you'd expect, a continuing strong commitment to the transatlantic alliance. The US remains our top partner in the world, but deepening alliances beyond Europe and North America to develop much more structured, deeper relationships with India, with China, in Latin America with Brazil, in Asia more generally, and in North Africa. Reform of international institutions to make them fit for purpose in the 21st century and to reflect the new realities in the 21st century, where the growth is going to come from Asia, not so much from Europe in future. And finally, upholding values which are integral to how we act in the world. So the National Security Council is a real step change in how we go about our business in the UK. It will be chaired by the Prime Minister or by the Foreign Secretary in the Prime Minister's absence. And the official head is now Sir Peter Ricketts, who until 3 weeks ago was the head of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. A key task of the National Security Council will be to oversee a strategic defence and security review. The last such review took place 11 years ago, and since then the world has changed a lot. We've seen 9/11, the attacks in the UK, we call them 7/7, and the UK has been involved in 2 major wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. So the international political and economic landscape has changed fundamentally in the last decade, and that review will need to look at the resources we have and the priorities and interests we have, and calibrate resources to, or calibrate our interests to the resources available. That, in brief, is where we are in the UK in politics and in machinery of government. It's been an amazing month for us all, and as civil servants we are now just coping with these new realities that we face. So it's a very exciting time for all of us, and I hope that's given you a little flavour of what life is like for civil servants like me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for the very interesting presentation. And fortunately, we have more than 19 minutes for questions,
please.
So the floor is open.
Thank you. Yep.
Andrei Nikitin, МГИМО. Your Excellency, how appreciate you the financial stability of United Kingdom now? More stable than the dollar economy or the euro economy, the role of pound.
Well, we live in interesting times. I mean, the world has gone through a very difficult 2 years, really, with a global economic crisis that affected everyone. The euro, as you may have seen from the EU-Russia summit that's just taken place in Rostov, the euro is fundamentally healthy. There is no major budget deficit in the eurozone, unlike in individual countries. And the euro members have agreed a major package to ensure the stability of the euro moving forward. We are not in that eurozone, as you know. Sterling inevitably has taken a buffeting, mainly because of the global economic crisis generally, which impacted on the UK just as it did elsewhere, but also it has been impacted by the size of our deficit, nearly $160 billion, major deficit. What the coalition government is determined to do is get that deficit reduced very quickly. They've already announced $6 billion cut in government spending, and more will be announced in the course of this year. Now that sends a signal to the financial markets of the determination of the government to deal with the deficit, which will have a good impact on confidence in sterling, confidence that the government is tackling the economic problems it faces. So I hope that we are through the worst of the global economic crisis, and that governments worldwide are beginning to look to where the next growth is going to come from, really. And that is something we discuss a lot with Russia, talking about cleaner, more energy efficient industries, green growth we call it. And I think that probably will be the next area for growth for the 21st century. So let's hope. Yeah.
Алексей Клименко, университет, Московский университет МВД. Госпожа посол, я ежегодно посещаю вашу прекрасную страну, и каждый год мне приходится оформлять туда, соответственно, визу. И несмотря на то, что я могу сказать, что визовый центр, который вот несколько лет назад возник, работает очень быстро и оперативно, но требования к документам все время повышаются, и опции в анкетах увеличиваются, усложняются.
Хорошо, я понимаю.
Я жду перевода. Я не обратил внимания, что вы понимаете без наушников, жду перевода.
Просто быстрее по-английски.
И я хотел бы в связи с этим спросить вас, как вы смотрите на перспективы упрощения визового режима, вот конкретно между Российской Федерацией и Великобританией? И вот чем, на ваш взгляд, вызвано такое усложнение каждый раз требований к документам? Потому что каждый год действительно вот не было ни одного года, когда бы они были идентичными. Они все время немножко, но усложняются.
Okay, fine, thank you. There is a lot of talk about trying to lift visa regimes. It was an issue for discussion in preparing the EU-Russia summit, but I don't think both sides are ready for that in practice. The UK is not a member of Schengen, so we have our own arrangements. We try to make the process of obtaining visas as smooth and efficient as possible, but we need to be clear that people have the funds to support themselves in the UK, and that they are going to legitimate, say, courses of study or for legitimate tourism and not to work. And that means inevitably we require documents that will give the visa officers enough confidence that the person is going for the purposes stated. Now that can be quite complicated. You do have to provide a number of documents to prove you are doing what you say you are doing. And I have to say that quite a number of people try to tell us they are going for tourism when in fact they're going to work. So we have controls in place for a good reason. Hand on heart, we will always continue to strive to make our service faster, more efficient, easier for you. You can apply online, etc. But we are not going to have no visa requirement for Russian citizens in the foreseeable future. Пожалуйста.
Юлия Гайдаева, МГИМО. Just one question. I'd like to know if David Cameron has some new views for political views, I mean, and will bring some political changes in general politics of the UK. So, for example, Anglo-Saxon model, Tony Blair supported these processes, but what about David Cameron? Thanks.
Yeah. Tony Blair's big idea was the third way. I don't know if you remember that, which was, yeah, okay, which was an idea that was sort of part way between capitalism, social democracy, a sort of kinder future, if you will, merging the best of both capitalism and social democracy, if I can put it that way. Cameron's idea was encapsulated in a term, big society. I don't think it didn't resonate terribly well with the electorate, because I think people didn't understand what he meant by big society. But what he was effectively saying was he wanted to get government out of people's lives and give individuals at local level more responsibility for their local environments, more say in how their schools or hospitals were run and how their local councils spent money. And so the state over the last years of Labour government has grown, the role of the state has grown from about 38% of GDP to over 50%. So the state was getting bigger in people's lives. So insofar as there is a big new idea, it is that giving people more responsibility and control over running their affairs, rather than having central government dictate everything on the basis of targets, etc. So if you remember big society, though that's the big buzzword. I don't know how long it'll last. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Good evening, Your Excellency. Thank you very much for your informative speech you gave us today. My question is, just before the election campaign was launched in the UK, there were some polls suggesting that certain foreign policy issues are becoming different, and that British society is becoming more concerned about immigration rather than security issues in Afghanistan, Iraq, and even the overall European integration. So my question is, in your opinion, is this new coalition going to be different in addressing foreign policy issues, and if yes, which are going to be the major problems? Thank you very much.
I mean, foreign policy is never a big topic normally at elections. Most people in general elections are concerned about domestic issues, about health and housing, taxation, transport, you know, all the issues that really have a major impact on their lives. The big change for the coalition is really the machinery change so far. Setting up a National Security Council that sees the UK role in the world, not just in terms of diplomatic relations between countries, but the whole gamut of aid, defense, foreign policy, energy, relationships, big issue with Russia and Europe, sees the UK foreign policy in a much wider overview. That is the big change for this government, and it means they're going to try and join up that effort in Whitehall in the UK. It means that all these individual government departments are going to have to factor in the overseas dimension to their work much more than they have in the past. Now, how that works out in terms of policies, what they're doing already is looking at Afghanistan and Pakistan every couple of weeks in the National Security Council. They're taking countries like India and China and looking at the whole spectrum of what we do in those countries and what more we could do to develop our relations. And that includes culture too. It includes education. You know, should we be bringing more of their Chinese or Indians to the UK to study at UK universities? All of those issues go into the pot now to produce a much more strategic policy on individual countries and regions. And Russia will go into that pot too and will be discussed in those terms in the course of this month.
Ambassador, we are here in the Institute of European Studies, and you have not said much concerning the UK in the European Union. Do you think that anything will change with the new government? Will the UK become more involved or less involved in European affairs than before?
William Hague has said two things: that he wants the UK to be active and activist in Europe, which is very good, but also that he doesn't want there to be any more transfer of powers to Europe without the British public having a say. So you wouldn't see the UK joining the Euro without a referendum on it in the UK, and it wouldn't happen in the lifetime of this government. And any proposals that might involve any more transfer of powers to Europe would be the subject of a referendum. So you might think there's a bit of a contradiction there. How can you be active and activist but say any more transfer of powers would involve consultation? But actually I don't think there is really an inherent contradiction. I think that for the coalition, Europe remains a fundamental partner for the UK. A lot of our trade goes through Europe. We have a lot of good cooperative practices where it makes more sense for Europe to act as a whole than for member states to act individually. So I think that process will continue, and I think you'll find they're very good, very active partners for Europe moving forward.
Your Excellency, my name is Savorska Ekaterina. I'm from МГИМО. I would like to thank you for your presentation, and here is my question. You have mentioned that you're taking the countries of your foreign policy into one melting pot. Therefore, I have a question. If there are any preferences for your ex-colonies, dominions, and actually countries of the Commonwealth?
Yeah, good point. William Hague is very pro the Commonwealth as a grouping. He doesn't think we use it enough as a grouping, and of course it's very large. And given our traditional links to the Commonwealth, we should be doing more with them to forge common positions on global economics, on reform of international institutions, etc. How that will work out in practice hasn't yet been articulated, but he does keep mentioning the importance of it to the UK in speeches. Some countries will matter more than others, of course, in that. With some we have incredibly strong links, what we call the old Commonwealth traditionally, but it remains to be seen what policies will be carved on the back of that aspiration to do more with that grouping.
Good evening, Your Excellence. I'd like to ask you about the British Council. There is a quite big network of the British Council throughout Russia, in different regions, in different cities, but Russia still doesn't have any National Institute of Culture. I mean, for example, Russian Center for Culture and Science, like we have in France, in Germany, and in lots of European countries. From your point of view, what are the main factors which are maybe slowing down the process of establishing such an institute in the Great Britain? As far as I know, if I'm not wrong, there is a judicial base. I mean, the agreement between our governments about the mutual establishment of such an institute. Thank you.
First of all, the British Council isn't represented throughout the regions in Russia. They're only in Moscow now. They were closed in St. Petersburg and Yekaterinburg because the Russians insisted they close a couple of years ago. That's regrettable, of course, because everybody loves what the British Council does. And they want to see more of it, so they operate only out of Moscow now. On establishing a Russian equivalent in the UK, you already have done that. Ruski Mir opened to do that sort of work in the UK last year, I think, from memory. And there is no bar on Russia opening more of these centres anywhere in the UK they like. It's not something we're saying we won't let you open a centre because we now only have one here. If Russia wants to open more cultural type centres in the UK, that would be very welcome, because promoting Russian language in the UK, very important. We have a number of good universities that have really good Russian departments, but not that many. And there is a real appetite in the UK, as there is here, for really good culture. And you have absolutely phenomenally good writers, dancers, whatever, you name it, really cutting edge culture here. And there's an appetite for hearing more about that and seeing more of it in the UK. So you're not barred from doing it at all. It could be it's just a money thing. No.
Your Excellency, as a follow-up to your answer, so we will greet open-heartedly the intention to restore, to improve the relationship between Great Britain and Russia. But what kind of steps you intend to make? So we need to see what is behind the thoughtful wills. It's one question, and immediately I jump to another one. We consider that you made a mistake when pulling out of the European People Party. Do you have the Cameron, after he won the victory, to return back to the European People Party and to exert any kind of influence in the work of the European Parliament? Because it's not the case now. It differs with the very strong and very influential position you had in the European Parliament. And with your permission, maybe another question. You will work in the European Union in another way. So now, what are your intentions to influence Germany and France to listen a little bit more to your position on the financial markets regulations and your stance in the G20?
Right. First of all, UK-Russia relations, well, you need to give the new coalition government a bit of time, actually. They are really still getting to grips with being in government and working out the key priorities. As I said earlier, Russia will be for discussion this month with them. I know that Cameron and Medvedev will both be attending the G20 summit towards the end of June in Canada. They're bound to meet then. We will be reviewing what the content of the relationship is in the run-up to that meeting, and there'll be further meetings on the calendar between foreign ministers, etc. But the substance and the parameters, all I can tell you now is what William Hague has said publicly, which is he'd like a more constructive relationship with Russia. The door is open, but it takes two to tango, shall we say. You know, it's not open, and that means it doesn't involve proper engagement from Russia. Excuse me a minute. On EPP, I can't comment on that. That's a political question. You need to ask David Cameron that one. I'm a civil servant. I don't answer political questions. On influencing France and Germany on financial market regulation, we talk to the French and the Germans very closely on this. We have good consultations in the framework of G20 now. I think G20 has come into its own in dealing with global economic crisis. Inevitably, countries have different perspectives on what will work to get us all out of the crisis we have faced. We don't always agree on every detail, but the joy of groupings like the G20 or indeed the EU are that everybody has some perspective to bring to the table, and ultimately you hope that you will compromise around a reasonable solution, and that's what we would aim for on very difficult issues like financial market regulation. Not easy. Maybe a couple more before my voice goes this evening.
Your Excellency, maybe shifting from political questions to personal ones, if you permit me.
I might not answer, but you can try.
Because I know that you started your diplomatic career working here in Moscow as the third secretary at the beginning of the 80s, and now you're the ambassador of the United Kingdom here. I'd like to ask you about your personal impressions of how Russia was changing from then to now.
Yeah, okay.
Russia, Moscow.
Well, I worked in Moscow from 1980 to 83, which is probably before quite a number of people in this room were born. During the Cold War, it was, I must say, a very difficult time, both to live here as a diplomat, because no one wanted to speak to us. I would never have been able to do this. I would never have been able to travel around Russia and see some of the beautiful cities on the Volga, for instance. Nizhny Novgorod closed in those days. A lot of Moscow region closed to diplomats, and actually closed to a lot of you, Russians too. So the ability to celebrate all these wonderful places and culture and historical monuments or historical estates was not really there. So that was very limiting for everyone, actually. The atmosphere now in Moscow is so completely different. You have made so much progress even over the last 10 years. Moscow is a huge, thriving, big city, 24/7 city, very exciting to live in this city. And I would never have said that in the 80s. In the 80s, you've all heard about it, some of you might have seen it. There were very few supplies in the stores, people queued for everything, so you'd see long, long lines in the streets everywhere. Everything was grey. There was no neon lights, no bright lights. The only bright things were the big red banners saying "Hail to the Communist Party," with the big butch men and women striding out to the future. But there was no colour in the city. So it was a really difficult time, I think, for everyone. And I think the generation growing up now have a much brighter future. And that is good. And just opportunities now to travel, to see other parts of the world, to compare and come back. Internet usage to know what's going on in the world. All of that is really important, I think, to the quality of people's lives. So I think you are a more fortunate generation than your parents were, really.
Okay, and the last point.
Your Excellency, I have a short question. If the Queen and the royal family altogether are still so popular as they used to?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. I would say yes. Her Majesty the Queen is a highly respected figure in our lives. And on the whole, I would say that's true of the royal family. Inevitably, nowadays, given media, given the spotlight on people, there is more intrusion into the lives of the royal family than there was even 30 years ago. So that means that the aura of royalty is no longer as sort of golden, if you will, as it used to be. But they do a lot of really, really good work for the UK, promoting the UK and its values, its culture, etc. I mean, they really do work incredibly hard for our interests. And I think having had the Queen on the throne for such a long time is a very stabilizing factor in the life of the United Kingdom. I mean, she has welcomed any number of prime ministers to form governments. Churchill was one of her first prime ministers to form, that she asked to form a government. I mean, you know, long, long time ago. So she has a lot of experience and a lot of wisdom through her time on the throne. So it's a good thing, good thing. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
One last, yeah, please.
Last one.
One last, if not political.
No. it's unescapable. It's kind of political question. So, what is the attitude of London towards Catherine Ashton?
Oh, well, Cathy Ashton, who is now the High Representative for the EU, I think that everyone understands that she has a very heavy job. There was huge expectation when she came into the role, and I think they are still working through the role and the formation of the European Action Service. This is all taking time to work out how it will operate. We are, of course, very supportive of the position and of her, as I hope are most member states. And it's really a question of giving time for the new mechanisms and institutions under the Lisbon Treaty to begin to produce results. The interesting thing about the EU-Russia summit that's just taken place in Rostov is you now have President Barroso, Cathy Ashton, and Van Rompuy, who are the people who will now be at summits. There will now be real continuity in dealing with third countries. Now, that is a good thing, because in the past, every 6 months, Russia or China or India, whoever, would have different faces round the table, a different agenda and focus from each presidency. So I think Cathy Ashton's role, Van Rompuy and Barroso together will help create more continuity and predictability and build up experience of EU relations with third countries. So I think it will deliver in the course of time better results, hopefully.
I meant more personal attitude.
Yeah, but I can't go there because that's political. But thank you for your question.
Okay, you see that our audience is a bit provocative, but
it's fine.
Yeah, thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your presentation, for your lecture, and I hope we will continue our cooperation.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your questions in English. Very good.